Bunnies, and welcome back all to Woodland Bunny, a cozy space of talk books. Grab yourself a warm hot drink, a cozy blanket, because today we are talking all things the mid-year book freakout tag. So let's get into the questions and my answers. This question is, what's the best book you've read so far this year? And of course, I can't just give you one answer. I've read so many good titles this year and found it so hard to narrow down. I just love going back through the first half of the year and seeing all of the great books you've read, especially when you're having a mediocre time in your reading life and you realise, okay, I have read great stories. So the ones which I've listed down here include Fear the Flames, which was phenomenal, which I finished most recently, The Kamigawa Food Detectives, and finally Funny Story. Those are the four in which I'm going to list that I think I had to kind of rank above the rest, and all for different stories. So just coming to mind, The Familiar, I've never really read much like it in terms of fantasy and how it made me feel. I don't know if it was Leigh Bardugo's writing style, the characters themselves, or what it was. Perhaps it was the magic, the historical setting, I really don't know, but I absolutely adored it. Kamigawa Food Detectives, for those of you who don't know, have started my love for Japanese literature and have kind of set me on a path of translated fiction and exploring that genre, because I have found, and I'll speak later about this with one of my other answers, but I've found that the translated sphere has always been quite overwhelming to me. I think because there's just so much opportunity and option out there, and I wasn't quite sure where to begin, but I just picked this book up randomly whilst I was in a bookshop in London and it did not regret it. It was so good. Has themes of nostalgia, food, kind of elements of mystery and putting the puzzles back together, human studies, and kind of, humanity and mundanity as well. So I highly recommend that one. Funny Story was Emily Henry's latest release, in which definitely one of my favourite romance books I've ever read. It was so raw, so vulnerable, so real. The characters just felt authentic to me. The struggles and traumas that they went with through childhood, through relationships and self-worth, and the whole complexity of the plot, but how wonderful it was, is what had me gripped and reading the pages so very quickly. And then the final book I mentioned was Fear the Flames, and what a fantastic fantasy this was. It had dragons in there, it had war, it had romance. It was so good, packed full of so many amazing characters. Again, superb writing, and I highly recommend. So hopefully that's a little bit something for everyone. I know that there's fantasy romance, kind of like a translated slice of life Japanese literature fiction there, and then other fantasy as well. But yeah, I think these are definitely the genres that I've been gravitating towards recently as well, but we'll get on to that in another question. Who is the best sequel you've read so far? And again, I couldn't just think of two. Sadly, I've been disappointed by quite a few sequels this year, and I feel as though it's really hard to have an amazing sequel because you have so much adrenaline and excitement for the first book because it's new and fresh. Going into the second book, you're kind of just wanting more from the writing and more from the characters. And yeah, I feel as though it's always hard to have a great and superb sequel. But my top two were The Traitor Queen and Swift and Saddled. So both kind of romance. One of them, Traitor Queen, is fantasy romance, which is the sequel to The Bridge Kingdom. Swift and Saddled is the sequel to Done and Dusted, in which is a cowboy romance. I thought both of these books, the reason why I loved them as sequels with no spoilers, is because they really helped drive the whole bigger picture, and it made you feel as though you were picking up things from the first book that you didn't really have knowledge of or were glossed over in the first book to kind of develop into sequels. I feel as though quite often with sequels you find that authors are just trying to rewrite the first book just with different characters perhaps, or maybe a different theme, whereas with these two books I found that very different. With Swift and Saddle we are following different characters, but we still do have the link in the world to the first book, and which I found was great. And The Traitor Queen were following the same characters, but it just kind of felt like one big story cut into two, which again, I love that kind of aspect of first and second installments. I feel as though it works really well. So yeah, those were my two best sequels of the year so far. The question is, what is the most disappointing book you read so far this year? And I hate being negative, but sadly for me, I do have two books to speak about, and the first is The Honey Witch. I was hugely let down by this. I keep saying this, and I just mentioned it in my June wrap up, but I don't think that this is YA. I really need to check that, but this felt so naive and it read so young, and for what the characters were going through and how they were speaking, I just feel as though the actions that they were doing and the dialogue, it just felt disconnected almost. And I just loved the setting, I loved the ideas of the characters, I loved the themes, but something about this book just left me feeling a bit deflated and disappointed, and just the feeling of disconnect, and which was really saddening because I was so eagerly anticipating this book. But please don't let these thoughts and feelings put you off reading it, because you might absolutely adore it. It might just be me that was disconnected from the story. And then the second book I want to talk about is A Restless Truth, which is the second installment to A Marvelous Light. It follows different characters, but I absolutely adored A Marvelous Light, and I was waiting, anticipating the release of A Restless Truth, and was sadly left bitterly disappointed. I just couldn't help but feel as though this book was boring, and I can't believe I'm saying that, but it just felt really boring to me, and I wanted more out of it. I felt like there was again a disconnect between our two main characters. One of them felt really naive and really frustrating and annoying, and the other one seemed to be very witty, and there was constant themes of them clashing, and I feel as though quite often that gives you a bit of angst and a bit of fun to the novel, but with this I was just getting bored and annoyed, and it felt very cabin fever-esque, and I don't know if that's because we were on a cruise ship and that was the setting, but it felt very suffocating, claustrophobic, and though it was just going on and on and on. And so yes, Sally didn't love it as much as I adored The Marvelous Light. So these are my two very sad, disappointing books of the year so far. So the next question is a two-part question. The first one is a book that came out in the first half of the year that you have yet to read, and then a book coming out in the second half of the year that you're anticipating reading. A book that came out in the first half of the year is Pirate Rights by Julia Armfield. I read Our Wives Under the Sea, and I have been adoring the subgenre of weird lit fic recently, and I've heard that this book perfectly encapsulates that subgenre. So it's on my shelves. I bought it. I've been highly anticipating it. I just need to get around to reading it. It's my birthday in August, but I'm thinking I might do a video dedicated to reading books that I'm anticipating. I feel as though that would just be a great birthday treat. I feel as though with a lot of my books, obviously I only buy books I'm really excited for, so some of the ones in which I'm really excited for I just don't get to, and I'm also a mood reader, so that's why I don't read things instantly. But yeah, that's the book for the first half of the year. The second half of the year, there is the second installment to The Days in the Marizaki Bookshop. I think it's actually coming out in July. I think it's actually coming out this month. But I adored the first book of this. Again, was on my translated Japanese fiction kick, still am, and adored that novel so very much. And so there is a second installment coming out. Cannot wait to get my hands on it. It's on my wish list. I need to check that at the release date, but I've been so awful at buying new releases just my whole entire reading life and life in general. But yeah, those are my kind of two anticipated reads. Next question is, do you feel your reading has changed or shifted throughout this first half of the year? And I would say yes and no. Yes, definitely, again, harping on about the translated fiction-esque thing. Japanese literature has become such a huge love of mine, just embedding the way that Japanese writers have their writing style and how they explore humanity and explore these kind of character studies. I just feel as though it's very unmatched to any other author styles that I've ever read before. Adoring just the Japanese culture in the books that I'm reading, and also the translation aspect. I'm just really intrigued by that, and I forever have been intrigued, but I think I've just felt so overwhelmed at the prospect of diving into the translated fiction area. I don't know why, I really don't know why, but now I think I've started that journey. I am just obsessed and I want to consume so much translated fiction, so please do leave me recommendations down below if you have any. And yeah, I think the other reason is no, because I am still loving romance, I am still loving fantasy. I've also picked up the kind of weird lit fic genre thingy that I was on about before. That has become a new love an obsession of mine, and which has opened doors to a lot of literary fiction that I wouldn't have picked up previously. So I'm very excited about that. But overall, I feel as though this first half of the year has been a lot of expansion for me in my reading tastes. I feel as though I'm reading a lot more widely, a lot more diversely, which is obviously always great and good, and just caring a lot more about what I'm consuming and my thoughts around it. All in all, I think my reading tastes have expanded and grown, and which is great, because I just see myself reading books that 5 years ago I probably would have picked up and just not understood, in which it fills me with so much joy, because I have forever wanted to be this reader, and I feel as though it's very much me getting in my own way and my own self-doubt getting my own way, because I feel as though anyone can pick up anything and understand and take away different things from it, and that's the beauty of novels and books and literature. But just the prospect of me walking into a bookshop and picking any book off the shelf and being able to take something away from that and enjoy it brings me so much immense joy, because I know that a few years ago I wouldn't have been able to do that. So yes and no, I would answer that question, but that is a very long-winded way of saying it. The final question is a book or books you want to read by the end of the year. Of course, I want to read my whole entire owned TBR by the end of the year. That is always the goal. I started the Serial TBR challenge last year now. I think it might have been a year. But yeah, I haven't ever put a restriction on that I can't bring in new books, because reading is what brings me joy. Books bring me immense joy, in having this fun and fresh joy of having books come in and then knowing books aren't for me and then passing on is just something in which I feel is fundamental to me enjoying reading. So it's kind of been like a loose goal of I'm wanting to get through all of my TBR. I haven't been buying huge amounts as much as I used to. I feel as though I was very much a consumerist in that aspect of it, and I would just be reading for the sake of reading and not really enjoying it, and it just kind of came an act of consumerism. Whereas now, even when I do buy a lot of books, like when I went to London, I bought tons of books. I'm genuinely excited about these books. I'm genuinely wanting to read them all. Getting back to the actual question, I think the books on my shelves in specific has to be The Green Dot. This is one in which I found in London, again in a bookshop, in just a random Waterstones, and I was so glad to stumble across it, because it's been on a wish list of mine for quite a while now, but it's just been so expensive everywhere I've looked. So I was really excited to find it in a bookshop, and I've just heard that it's kind of like a 20-something going through life, experiencing life, might have a bit of weird lit fic in there, but I think it's just more literary fiction and just mundanity, and those are books in which I'm just loving consuming at the moment, especially as a 20-something just trying to figure out life. So yeah, I'm very excited to read that one, but that's the only one that hugely springs to mind at the moment that I don't have specific plans for or specific videos surrounding them. So yeah, I think that's the main one in which I'm anticipating reading or want to read by the end of the year, but I think the answer to that in total is all of my TBR. So yeah, these are all of the questions for this mid-year freak out tag. I know there's so many variations out there now. I think I just did a mix and a jumble of all the different variations I found and the questions that sounded interesting to me. So I hope you don't mind if this isn't the simple, normal structured format or formula that everyone else is doing. I had fun answering these questions. I would always love to hear your answers down below. I love listening to other readers' answers, and I just find readers are so phenomenal, how everyone is just so different and so unique, and you can read the same books and have different thoughts and feelings around it, and different answers to these questions. Yeah, that's probably a ramble on the book community and my love for it. But anyway, thank you ever so much for watching. Thank you ever so much for listening to me ramble on endlessly. And I hope that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you have a wonderful day or night. And until next time, friends, bye.